Okay, thank you everybody for joining us on this edition of the Good Deeds Note Investing podcast, Open Mic Night. Today, Gail is traveling, so I am doing this solo tonight as she's been down in New Orleans at a property that she recently took back. So, with her gone, I wanted to do or show everyone tonight a case study of a deal. And I titled this one "A Killer of a Deal." And the reason I entitled it that was the borrower was actually convicted and in prison for murder. So, be some interesting little sidelights to this story. But that was one of the first things I found out about that was that's where they were. And little background, I'm not going to give city, I'll tell you it's in Virginia, but the borrower was a businessman who was running a multi-million-dollar business and had a mistress, I think, who worked for him based on some of the articles I read online, and was trying to find a way to, I'm guessing, get rid of his wife. And they had multiple homes across Virginia and, worth millions. And one of, instead of, I'd say, trying to do it the easy way. If there is an easy way, I don't know, never tried it. But he had some of his workers throw acid on his wife, and she ended up surviving for a while and then ended up passing from it. But it's a horrific thing, to say the least, but can clearly tell this guy wasn't, the wisest of individuals of, trying to have two of his workers try and take care of his wife by throwing a certain type of acid on her. So, yes, has anyone heard of divorce? That is true. Some people just, yeah. So you always wonder what's going through people's minds, and there's a lot in this story that kind of just sets the tone. Okay. So, about this property, it was acquired in June of 2017, and had a unpaid balance of 45,000. Payoff was about 48,000. House was worth about 70,000. It was pictured a house, nice, cute little home. The principal and interest was low. It was only 325 because there was a modification at 3.75% when the borrower went to prison. His family was actually taking care of the house, and it was a rental, and they actually owned three houses on the street. And with that, they were using them all as rentals, and they were renting them for 600 at 325 a month principal and interest. They were getting good cash flow. And one of the things, just again, I want to reiterate is this was a performing note. They were paying for, I think it was about 4 years, 4 consecutive years. They were paying. So, again, little background on the note was modified at 3.75%, and it had a balloon due in March of 2018. So within a year, they had a balloon payment to pay this thing off, within a year. So I'm thinking, okay, I can bid little aggressive on this thing, and, they got to balloon it and pay it off in the year. But, we'll talk about lessons learned about balloon payments at the end. But, as I noted, they had 4 years of consistent payments. It was bought with, using IRA funds at 12% return prior to the balloon. If it was a balloon, the returns would have been over 30%. And, there was no JV partner on this deal, so it wasn't like there had to be money split and so forth and so on. And as I mentioned, the property was used as a rental managed by the sisters. The thing that the property did have, and, I guess, I don't know if I wasn't thinking completely straight at the time, but the property had some subordinate liens on the property. But at the time, the property was worth 70. It had some other liens, and if they owed 50, those could get paid off, or a majority of them get paid off. Trying to work something out with the borrower on that. But the pictures you also see are the property when my preservation company went at a later date. So just to show you how quickly a property can go from good to ugly pretty quickly. I'll show those as we continue to go through those. Um, a few other things I'll mention as part of due diligence. Like I said, it was performing for 4+ years. So it was really something that, looked like it would continue to perform. And my hope was either, they could try and refinance it out, or I would turn around and adjust the loan at the balloon date to try and get a little more money out of them. One of my plans or options was, okay, instead of paying 325, bump them up to 425 a month. They'll still cash flow the property at 600, and it would put more money in my pocket and get that interest rate a little higher to adjust for it. And then my returns would go from like a 12 to a 16. So those were kind of my two exit strategies, where, either have them pay it off, or if they don't pay it off, see if they could keep pumping up, more. The third option was to foreclose, but honestly, I didn't think that was really going to happen in this case. And boy, was I wrong. So the workout period. So, this was one where the borrower basically continued to make payments all the way through the balloon period. And again, more wonderful pictures of the house that you can see. So they went from June through March plus of the following year, and actually I think it went into April and May when they kept paying on this note. You can see where I'm going with this. But once the balloon terminated, again, I tried to increase the payment to 400 plus, and try and get them at like an 8% interest rate. But the borrower came back and said, they wanted the payment rate to stay the same. And the reason why was, they were basically, renting this for the brother who was in prison, and they weren't making any money off of it, even though it had some little bit of cash flow when you took into account the taxes, the insurance, and just some of the repairs, which I don't know what they did for repairs, honestly. I could see how they probably, or, if there was months where it wasn't being leased, they were basically doing this and not getting anything from it. So at the end of the day, we could not reach an agreement. We went back and forth for about 3 months with them and tried to reach an agreement with them. And unfortunately, we could not reach that agreement. So we started the foreclosure process. And as part of that process, the borrower did have their tenant vacate. They didn't fight their foreclosure process. Unfortunately, a deed in lieu, at the time didn't work out because of some of these subordinate liens that I didn't want to take on. So that really wasn't the option. So really, I was dropped back down to that only option of foreclosing. Preservation company did come in after they vacated and gave repairs of $50,000. Preservation companies, I'll be honest with you, their repair costs are usually 2 to 3 times more than what I think it would really cost. But as you can see, this house, the floors were pretty much destroyed. The kitchen cabinets, I honestly don't know how somebody was living in this house. And I think basically over the last few months, it probably got beat up pretty good, because at one point in time, they had this on the market for like $65,000. They were trying to sell it right before we went to foreclosure. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But, clearly this wasn't, a $65,000 house, unfortunately. So, with that, here's a key takeaway for people to talk about is, lessons learned. And every deal you're going to do, you're going to have lesson learned. First one I had is, don't ever assume a borrower will refinance with the balloon, especially if there's subordinate liens, because it reduces your options. When there's a second lien on it, or there's liens from one of his companies on there, which there was about 2 years before the statute of limitations would have expired on those, but still, they were still on. So, those are things, don't ever assume. What happens when you assume. But especially with balloons and subordinates, because you also can't do cash for keys. Typically, it really, really reduces the impact or what you can do with that loan. Next item I had was, when you have an asset, do quarterly property inspections with your preservation company for occupancy. I picked this tip up about a month ago from a servicing company where I was buying some assets. And in the servicing file, they have a company go out every quarter that basically takes some photos of the outside and just checks on the property, make sure the lawn's being cut and everything's being done. And typically they leave a little note on the door just letting them know they came by and they're for the mortgage company. And if there's any issues or problems, please feel free to give a call. Um, and I thought that's actually a really good idea. And a lot of preservation companies will do it for like $20 to $30. So when you think about the overall cost of spending, let's call it $60 to $100 a year per asset just to go get those inspections, I think it's absolutely well worth it. Now, when you have a lot of assets, it can get a little pricey and expensive, but again, you need to look in the best interest of your properties and want to understand what's going on. So kind of look back at this case and look at these photos here with the sink, the bathtub, and I included the toilet because lo and behold, the toilet I think is the cleanest thing in this property. So I was going through the pictures again when I was putting this presentation together. I was laughing because I'm like, the toilet is like I said, the cleanest thing there. Let's see, and a few other things. The property was listed when I owned it for. The property was listed for $70,000, and I did not send anyone by to take a look when the property is listed. If you have a property, whether it's the note or a land contract, whatever it is, and you see it listed for sale, pay someone if you have to go through and take a look at the property. It's a free way to get what it looks like on the inside, because sometimes there might not have pictures online, sometimes there are, but this was listed for a very short time. And I look back at, okay, what could I have done better? Because you always want to try and learn what it is you can do better. And this was one that I looked back and really thought, I really probably should have done that. And the last is, make sure your realtor knows BPO does not stand for best possible outcome. And that is something I'll, reiterate time and time again, is always, review and check the BPOs and kind of get an idea. And also check when you get a BPO, not just, a lot of people just look at the number and be like, oh, great, here's a number. What did they say needed to be repaired? What were the comps that they were using? I'll go online and I'll check the comps they're using. And then if there's still pictures of the inside, if that agent was using a comp that was a home that was just recently renovated and it's, within the same price area or price point, I'll push back on that BPO and be like, this isn't legitimate. Get me some real, some real data to go back with, because you'll find that where, they'll pull data and some of these agents will just pull, okay, here's, 3 houses within a mile that sold within the last 3 months without looking at the interior of them. And it can really, really throw you for a curveball. I don't think take that. There was on one occasion where I had a property worth more than what the BPO came back at. In most instances, I would say they come back at, properties are usually 30% lower, is what 20 to 30% lower if I had to throw a dart at it. And I know people have talked about, 10% or whatnot, but when you take into account the, if you go do a trash out and everything, if you got a BPO of 50,000, expect at the end of the day to sell that thing for 35, or you might get 40, but you put $5,000 to trash it out and do other things. So one thing I cannot stress enough is on some of these BPOs, just to really, really focus and make sure you look at them and understand them, and just don't look at what the number says on them. So some questions. Let's see. You thought it was rented. When they're not paying taxes is also good for insurance. When they are not paying taxes, also good for insurance purposes. think that's just a comment that was made there. But on this asset, the other thing too was the borrower was paying their taxes. They were paying the insurance on the property. So, like I said, it was really a performing asset. And then I think uh, I don't want to say I got too greedy, but when I wanted to get that payment bumped up a little bit, because after servicing and everything, I'm clearing $300 a month, and letting them basically collect, cash flow a property at 3.75% interest. Uh, for me, it just, the numbers didn't work. And um, I wanted to, try and get out of this deal in a way I could. So unfortunately, in a sense, did they call my bluff a little bit? They did, yes, because, they basically said, I'm not doing it. And then had to turn around and foreclose on them. So, uh, this property, end of story on it is, where'd all my numbers go? Okay, just going to put them all up here. Got some questions coming through as well. So before we get to these, question, did you attempt to refi when the balloon was due? So this was a note where I was in the first position. I tried to get them to refinance, but they didn't want anything to do with it because they didn't, it was in the borrower's name who was in prison. So to get him to refinance, they were power of attorney, and they didn't want to. They said they were looking into it, but they wanted nothing to do with it. And really, I think this was their opportunity to tell their brother that, oh, sorry, we lost the house because we didn't pay for the balloon. Because I truly believe, based on the servicing comments, they really didn't want anything to do with this property, especially as you could see the condition it was in, and trying to get it fixed up. And again, they were collecting rent for their brother, and really they're basically doing it out of the goodness of their heart. So I don't think it really benefited them. So. Yes, Sylvia. Oh, I understand. Yes, inspections. Yes, they're also very good for insurance purposes. So if you have insurance on the property and there ever is a claim, you have photos from prior to the claim and after. So that is absolutely beneficial. So all in on this deal, how everything turned out. We paid $32,000 for this. All-in costs were just under 35, and the reason why that wasn't higher is because the borrower made $3,000 or $4,000 worth of payments. If they hadn't made those payments and so forth, my all-in cost would have been closer to $37,000, $38,000 at that point in time. Which this did go to auction, and I think my auction price at the time was $40,000 because I just wanted to dump it. When I go, again, BPOs and agents, even in the condition it was in, were still telling me it could get between 40 and 45,000. So because it's in a not in a somewhat desirable area of this location. So I went in and I said, okay, I'll bid it at 40,000, see what happens. And nobody bid on it at auction. The one thing to ask the auction, whoever your attorney is, whoever goes to the auction, is ask them who had the highest bid before they go. Ask them if it doesn't reach the reserve or your bid. Ask them who was there, and ask them if they got any subsequent offers. Meaning, there was a guy here who went back to the attorney and said, hey, I'd give him $32,000 for this property. And I basically told him at the time, hey, look, no, not interested, and continued to, look at it. And then I realized, you know what, let me at least go back to them and counter. And we ended up settling at a price of $39,000, and the person who ended up buying it was actually a wholesaler who turned around and he sold it for $41,000. So ended up, he made $2,000 for doing nothing. I got rid of a property from a percent return wise. Hey, it wasn't a great show-stopping return. Got 12%, which is what I was getting, was performing. But you know what? It made $4,000. So Joel Markovits had a great line the other night or other day on something I was listening to. I think it was over the weekend, who mentioned, IRR, or your return, doesn't pay your bills. It's how much profit you make is what pays your bills. So, this was $4,000 in my, in a retirement account that, if it was, sitting in a regular bank account, would have made $100. So you can look at it that way. Is it, it's typical, all the things that kind of happened in this deal, where it went from a performer to a non-performer, the condition of the property. And honestly, I look back at it now, and I would never pay $32,000 for this note. I actually ran the numbers back today, and if I was doing this today, which it's a year and a half later, I would probably be in the mid-20s, even on a performing note. And, basically, if the seller doesn't want to sell it at that price, then fine by me, but definitely would leave more wiggle room in there. And then if that was the case, basically the deal would have made about close to 10,000 on, 35, then I'd be up around the 30% return in that worst case situation. So that's kind of the deal I wanted to show everyone, but I thought it would be an interesting story just because of some of the other, side parts to it, with the borrower being in prison. And, unfortunate, it's one of those things when I look back now and kind of try and play a little more of the psychiatrist on some of these deals, so really starting to look at, okay, what is the situation the person is in? And, probably looking back at it, I probably wouldn't even have bought this note, because of the fact that, okay, I got a guy in prison, somebody else's family's managing this thing. What incentive is it for the family to manage this? Is there really any incentive? Even though they're paying, I get caught up, I think, too much in, hey, it's a paying note with a balloon, and oh boy, I can cash in on this balloon, and the house is going to be worth all this money. I'll foreclose, and if I foreclose, it's going to sell for the total payoff at auction, and great, I'll get all my money and make 30%. Well, I probably didn't really fully analyze the full package of, the downside or negativities that could have occurred. So, some questions. Christine, when it didn't sell at auction, does this mean the property ended up on a struck-off list that auction buyers can go in and buy on, or are they contacting you directly? They contact me directly. So after the auction, basically, my attorney got their names and contact information, so I reach out to them directly. And of the houses I foreclosed on, the first one I foreclosed on sold at auction. The other three that come to mind right now, this is one that I took back and someone at the auction bought. There was another one recently that similar, where I went to auction. They didn't bid at the auction, but I ended up actually selling it for more than what my bid was at the auction. So that was kind of a nice little win-win from that perspective. And then another one, same thing, another one that the auction number I bid at, I've actually sold for greater than that value. Now that I think about it, I can think of at least a fourth one that did that, and a fifth one that I got an offer in on today that is an all-cash offer on a property I foreclosed on, that the price that I got today was higher than what I bid on at auction. Let's see. Question: when you bought the note, did you put forced place insurance on it until you found they had insurance? Yes. Typically, the day I fund a note, I put forced place on it. And if they show that they have insurance, then I just take it off. And sometimes I may get hit for a month of fees, but it's well worth the risk. I use JB Lloyd for my forced place insurance. What's nice about their system is there's an online portal where I can go in and just add a property very quickly. And with them, you pay by the month. I know there's other insurance companies where you fill out the form, they send you what it is, and you have to pay by the year. So it can get, pretty pricey when you're paying, for the full year. Each policy, says costs $500. All of a sudden, if you buy 10 notes at $500, you're cutting a check for $5,000 for that forced place insurance. Now, it's something that you should definitely include as your costs that you have your JV partner provide. But on the flip side, if it's something that you can pay on a monthly basis versus the yearly basis, I just find that a little simpler because it's easier just go in and cancel. When you're paying by the year, you have to send them a letter canceling it, then you got to wait for your refund. Whereas in this system, I can go in right now and change the insurance, whether I want to increase the limits, decrease the limits, do whatever. So I find it just more user-friendly. Another question. So when doing your numbers for ROI, I also look at, if I take it back, what I could sell it to investors, 70% rule. Do you lower your bid if your ROI number or SS percentage? So for my analysis, and I'll say changed over the years, what I do is I now run through about 8 or 9 different scenarios of exit strategies on my calculator. It can calculate all 8 or 9. But after you bid on, sorry, my printer's going a little kooky. After you bid on 8 or 9 assets, hold on one second. Sorry about that. I'll make sure we get the people to edit this portion out of the printer in the background. So what I was saying is my ROI calculator has 8 or 9 exit strategies on it that calculates the returns for each scenario. And from there allows me to determine kind of what the worst case is and bid off of that. Now, I can tell you based on bidding on probably, call it 1,000 assets, that I can look at a tape right now and tell you what the lowest or worst exit strategy is going to be. So I can look at 10 assets, and it's okay, Yasmina. No one's going to see you. I can look at 10 assets and understand based on them what the principal and interest payment is versus the UPB versus the interest rate and the fair market value right off the bat. Know which exit strategy most likely is going to deem the lowest return. And for people who are looking at assets, for contract for deeds, 90% of the time the lowest return is actually if they start reperforming. And you'll think about that and be like, wait a second, how could that be the case? But the reason why is when you look at some of these returns or payments on them, when they're paying $150 a month, it's a low monthly payment. And if it's non-performing, you have to look at it as if it was a performer and bid it off of, that price. So if you see a $30,000 UPB, that's, call it paying $150 a month. I'm just going to pull my calculator out right now, but you're probably looking at, a bid of, if it's non-performing, maybe $6,000 to $8,000. Even if it was performing, I'd say that's what your bid would be, because you look at it, $150 is paying you, $130 a month times 12. You're taking in, $1,500 a year. So, you want to make sure you get, your money back on that. So it's something definitely to take a look at in those numbers when you're looking at things, but just understanding what that worst case exit scenario is. Link for forced place insurance. Yes, Christina, what I'll do is I'll put you in touch if you'd like with my rep who can, you found it, Lloyd Insurance, but I can put you in touch with my rep who can get you hooked up as well. So I found them to be great to work with. I'm just going to stop my sharing now. Okay, what are the questions people have out there? I see we've got a bunch of people on right now. Uh, Property preservation companies. There's a bunch of them out there. Uh, Between U.S. Best Repair is one. Um, that's the one that sticks in my head right now because they were working on this property asset for me. But there's a bunch of them out there as well. Pull up the name of another one right now. First Allegiance is another name of a company. There's Sandcastle. Sandcastle is another one have used as well in the past. So for property preservation, there's a bunch of nationwide companies. The comment I'll make about property preservation is if you're going to have them do work on the property, just check their estimates. They're typically a little high on that. Lawn cutting varies significantly between them. Changing out locks and winterization can change significantly. I'll use one if I'm changing out locks and getting a lawn cut versus others if there's more other things to be done. So they'll give you a list of their pricing and services so you can kind of compare and use one for different types of properties. Any other questions that people have out there? Question on CFDs. You mentioned that I would go by as is value, especially when you have such a low payment. For CFDs, the way I analyze them is, I'll look at what the original CFD loan amount was and when it was originated. So that's one component to get an idea for what the price is. Because if they had a $30,000 CFD back in, call it 2014, that property might actually be worth more now. But when I start looking at the monthly payments, that's the key to look at is, some of these loans that are still have a UPB of 28,000 or 29,000 might only be paying $150 a month. And say that was a performing CFD. One thing you want to look at is, if you're targeting a 12% yield, I put out some performing CFDs out to people recently. Is, say if it's paying, say you're netting $125 a month, you're netting $1,500 a year. At 12%, the most you'll want to pay for that is, $12 or $13,000. Even though the UPB is like 28,000, if you were going to bid, I've seen people post things like bidding 80%, and if you bid 80% of 28,000, you're at 22,000. How many years is it going to take you to get your money back at $1,500 a year? It's going to take you, 15 years to get your money back. So that's something you definitely want to be careful of on the CFD front. And people have other questions, we'll be happy to answer those online or offline about some of the CFDs. Now, some of the benefits of a CFD are if it goes in default, you actually get the property. There's good and bad with that. You get the property, but you also can't go after somebody for deficiency. So if they completely trashed a house and it's only worth 10,000 and they had a 30 or $40,000 CFD, and say it was an investor who owned 6 or 7 other properties on a CFD, you can't go after his other properties. From what I'm being told, you might be able to, in a civil case, but the reality of it is it's much different. In a mortgage, if somebody has 10 properties and you foreclose on them and they're still, you sell it for $50,000 less than what they owe, that $50,000, you can file a civil case against them and get a judgment, which you can then attach to their other properties. So it's one thing that I don't know many note investors that do that, but there is that ability to do that. But 90% of the time, probably even higher, the person that's getting foreclosed upon really doesn't have any other assets or properties, but in some instances they actually do. And what are the questions? Okay, why isn't you can't go after other assets in that case? And it is state dependent, but typically in a land contract, land installment contract, contract for deed, your only remedy is the property. It's similar to, it's literally similar to having a renter. Renting your property. If a renter in your property trashes it, you know, you can sue them for the damages and so forth, but what are your chances of trying to collect? And I don't believe in those instances you really can go after, their other property. You'd probably have a difficult time doing that. So, would reporting them credit bureau solve that? I don't believe so. A lot of times I don't think a lot of these borrowers care whether or not the credit bureau is getting reported to or not. I got a story that literally something recently just happened where I have a note that a land contract that I acquired where the borrower hasn't paid. The borrower reached an agreement a year ago, which would have cut her principal in half. So call it they owed $30,000. The prior owner of the note offered to say, "Hey, you start paying me $300 a month. I'll give you it's 0% interest for 5 years. I'll cut it down. You pay $18,000 over those 5 years, whatever it is. We're even. We're good. Done." And the person owed 30+ thousand. Person made 2 payments, stopped paying, hasn't made a payment in a year. I acquired the note. And I tried to get a little creative, and my mom's on here right now as well. And she's one of these properties is actually one we're invested in together. So we have another property in the same town. And what I actually offered this woman was, "Hey, look, you haven't paid in a year. You basically, need to come up with some cash, or you're going to lose the house essentially, because there's also, taxes owed on this other property." I said, here's a once in a lifetime deal I'll give you. I will give you a house. And it was this other property I have, which I have on the market right now, but the property she has is worth probably 2 to 3 times what this other property is worth. And when you look at the payoff that she owes, she basically owes what's up to the full payoff. So I said, "Hey, look, I'll switch houses with you. Let's cancel the land contract, and you can have a house free and clear that you can live in. That's a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, and call it even." And the woman comes back and says, "Well, no, that really doesn't work for me because I really like this house, and I'm going to stay in this house." And the servicer commented back, "Well, it's great you want to stay in this house, but do you realize that you actually have to pay to stay in the house?" And so, unfortunately, what's probably going to end up happening is the reality is, this other property I'll sell, and the house that she's in right now, hopefully she can get back on track and still start making payments. But, track record shows that typically when people get that far behind, they have a lot of trouble staying on. So at some point in time, unfortunately, that property may go back into distress. But just to give you kind of the thinking of people, like, when you ask, would reporting to credit bureaus solve certain problems? It's kind of what we talked about earlier. What goes through some of these borrowers' minds, I can't figure out and I can't imagine. Now, what I'll do is I play the odds. When I think, okay, I got to think that a majority of these people think logically, and will probably do, what most common people would do. But in some instances, you just get that curveball that is like, wow. So that was one of them. Question came through: do I pull credits during due diligence? No, I don't. If I was investing in seconds, I would. In first, the reality is I really care more about the property than the borrower. If they want to get on a payment plan, your servicer typically sends out what's called a shock package. And what that includes is a bunch of paperwork. Basically, it's a credit app for them to fill out, as well as sends them information to confirm that you own the loan, and they have to fill that out at that point in time. And they have to, you know, they tell you what the hardship is and everything along those lines. So at that point in time, they do. But I know some people do run credit reports on them. I typically don't, because it's more for me. It's, at the end of the day, you don't end up with the borrower, you're going to end up with the property, if anything. So my focus is on making sure what is the property worth and how to make sure I protect that asset on the property. Of course, I would love to have them start paying again and start affording things. But, and sometimes a credit report might say, okay, this person really can't afford that house. But as part of when you sign up for servicing contracts, it's the law that you have to treat each borrower in a similar fashion, meaning when I fill out the forms for Madison, there's a form that's basically like, okay, will you, not you have to, but will you offer borrowers loan modifications? And, I click on yes on that thing. So what that means is when a borrower is in default, you have to give them the option to at least fill out that paperwork and package, every borrower, to for the possibility of a loan modification. Now, it doesn't mean you have to give them one if they owe you $10,000 in past due payments and say, hey, look, I can afford $300 a month and here's my credit report that says I can do that. That doesn't mean you have to accept it because of how far they're behind, but it means you at least have to offer it. Do you have that situation with a special servicer, Singer? I'm sorry, Christina, if you could just, which situation were you referring to? I'll be happy to answer that. And do I have business liability insurance, and how else do you protect yourself? I do have, sorry, I need a drink of water. I do have business liability insurance. And the other thing I have is my LLC structure is a pyramid. So I have entities that own notes, I have entities that own land contracts, and then I have entities that own entities that are essentially holding companies. If you ever listen to Laughlin and the Rockefeller strategy, is what they call it. That's similar to how my business structure is set up. The reality of how you set up your business, it's only as good as how you manage it. And what I mean by that is, you need separate bank accounts. You can't commingle funds. You can't kind of just shift assets from one to the other. Everything has to be completely run like a business, and like each one is a separate business. So, and with contract for deeds, the other thing with the insurance is you'll have a different type of insurance for a contract for deed than you would for a note. And one thing that just popped in my head for insurance as well, if you have a note, so say your loan is boarded at Madison and it's a first position note and it gets foreclosed upon. Once it's foreclosed upon and you take ownership of your property, that forced place insurance policy with Madison is no longer valid. It is, you need to get a different type of policy, and you have to get it outside of Madison. It's something I've talked to Shante about, and making sure that they, if there's a way for them to kind of reiterate that to borrowers, to owners of notes, but it's really honestly not their, it's not their responsibility in some sense. They got to tell you, hey, we're taking this off, and we're not, it's coming off your bill, but it's still something everyone should put in the back of their mind is when you foreclose, make sure you have the proper insurance. Business liability, who do you have that with? Do you use trusts? I do not use trusts as part of any type of structure. From my understanding, trusts are more used for identity purposes of trying not to find out who the person is. 70 Investments, who many of you know me as. 70 Investments doesn't own any notes. I don't, buy notes in 70 Investments. So if I have a borrower, who knows my name, or looks me up, they can find my name and stuff and see. But if I bought everything in 70 Investments, they could go on my website, learn all about me and stuff. So my entities are all in different names, that are not things that I market to the public. The one I offered another home, that situation, that was actually with through Madison. Daniel Singer, who is a third party special servicing company. I've used them, but I don't use them a lot. I've had great experience when I've used them, but typically a lot of the experiences I've had, I use with Polaris, who I've used a lot, who is comparable to a Singer. They're a nonprofit who can reach out, as well as just with Madison as well. And the key I'll tell people, if you use Madison, is just stay on top of your whoever your asset manager is. I wouldn't say email them 3 times a day, because you have to remember how many loans they have. But in this business, things go very slowly. It's not after you buy the note, it goes from going 1,000 miles an hour to turtle speed. But just stay on top and say, hey, if you reach out to the borrower, you can log in and see the servicing notes when they're reaching out or what's going on. So it's just a matter of staying on top of people and communicating. Okay. Any other questions? Making sure I answered everybody. Good. Well, I think I've answered everybody's questions. Then, hold on. Business liability, is that errors and omissions insurance? No. Errors and omissions insurance is those are more for industry professionals like engineers, architects, where if they make an error and omission, like umbrella, it's really, when I say business liability insurance, actually I answered that slightly incorrectly. It's an umbrella policy is what I have. I have I'm not sure the value, but I have an umbrella policy that covers. So say, I also have some rental property. So say somebody trips and falls at a property, and they, sue my homeowner's policy on there, and homeowners only covers a certain amount. I have additional umbrella policy as well as additional coverage that would cover something of that nature. And when you're investing in CFDs, I recommend you also have, as part of your package that you have set up, you also get an umbrella policy as well. So if people are interested, put in the chat. I'll be more than happy to get an insurance person, maybe Beth from JB Lloyd. I could get her on, because there's different types of insurance where some of them, and I can't recall the names right now, but I know this has burnt several people in the past, where you buy a note, and then there was a claim a month ago, or during the transition, or a week before you bought the note. There's occurrence-based and claims-based are the two, and one of them is basically if it occurred at a certain point in time, then it's fine. It rolls over to the next person as long as they have insurance. And then in another type, if you don't file it while you have that insurance policy, they won't cover you. And a lot of people get that policy because it's cheaper, but I know people who got burnt very badly because of that. Question about my umbrellas, both. I have personal and business, because my rentals, some of them are in my name, my own name, where and the business ones are under the business. They're insured. Okay. Christina, yes. Those companies that do investment properties overall, those companies are good for CFDs and umbrella policy as well. Yes. My umbrella policy is with JB Lloyd. So when I set everything up with them, it's it's basically the price is based off of the value, but also depending on the size of your portfolio, you work with them in determining what the umbrella is going to be. And the good thing is you can always change it. So if you go from 10 assets to 50 assets, you can say, hey, look, now I want from instead of a $2 million to a $5 million policy. Another question popped through. Will players help some of us newbies who are starting out? They have in the past. The last conversation I've had with Polaris has been they've scaled down a little bit. So I don't know. I haven't asked that question recently, but I know the bunch of them have somewhat scaled down on the borrower reach out, and they're not doing it as often. So for people who have been clients in the past, yes, they'll still service. Andy Linloff was my contact, and I can reach out to him. And again, he'd be another great person that Gail and I have talked about bringing on the show as well, just to hear from other third-party reach out companies. And if those listening, if there's somebody that you think you'd enjoy coming on the show as well, definitely let us know. On March 7th, I'd just like to let everyone know, we're going to have Debbie Mullins, who is a bookkeeper who does a lot of books for note investors. She does mine as well as I know a lot of other investors. I got her contact information from a bunch of people in Scott's mastermind group who have used her. So she does my books, and I know there's been a lot of questions recently about 1099s, about, just the principal versus interest, what's taxable, what's not taxable. So we're going to bring her on March 7th. We're trying to get her on earlier, but because she was wrapping up everyone's books in 1099s and stuff, she was like, I just need some breathing room. So we decided to bring her on the first week in March, on where people can come on and ask questions, and she's going to talk about the top 5 do's and don'ts of bookkeeping as well. So I'll make the comment, she's not an accountant, but she definitely knows her stuff. And one of the things I see a few people talk about bookkeeping, I'll be honest, it's something that I am a person who tries to do as much as possible as part of my business, but that was the one thing that right off the bat, I was like, I want nothing to do with this because of tax implications and audits and everything along those lines. That was the one thing I'm like, you know what? I am paying somebody to do that. And I'll tell you, I highly, highly recommend, if you've got some deals going, especially with some JV partners and stuff, have somebody take care of your books for you, because you're going to struggle and spend a lot of time on it. And, it's one of those things where it's not making you any money. It's something that just takes time away from you for doing other things. So, Christina, after this, I will send you that contact information for Andy. I'll shoot you his email and phone. And what I can do is in the show notes for this episode, which will probably be released in about a week and a half, I will also put in for everybody, again, the contact information for JB Lloyd. I'll also put in the contact information for Polaris. I'll include some of the preservation company contact information as well. Question came through while we're talking about bookkeeping is who keeps track of payments other than Madison? Would that be a bookkeeper? Yes, it is. Well, I also keep track of it as well, but in a sense. And one thing that's interesting that, like I didn't even think of was, Madison at the end of the year sent a 1099 for my entities, and Debbie went through and started checking it and said, hey, wait, this doesn't match based on the payments that we got from Madison. And there were some things that actually found out to show that when Madison during the year sent a payment, they may have sent it or may have coded it as principal when it was actually interest or something. And they went back and fixed it, but they never sent me a new statement or things along those lines. So it's always good, to have somebody else basically at the end of the year check your books to make sure everything zeroes out in that sense. Because, when you look at your balance sheet, which is basically you've got your assets, and your assets are equal to your liabilities and any equity you have in there, you want to make sure all that balances out, but also you want to make sure the payments and the principal and interest you get from your servicers and from people and all expenses, all of that balances out. So everything zeroes out between what you've got in and out the door from the servicer, what your checking accounts or whatever accounts you use all zero out, and then of course your books zero out. And it's like I said, it's a saving grace on how much time it would take me to do that versus having a third party do it. Okay. Well, again, thank you all for hopping on this evening for this episode of the Good Deeds Net Investing podcast. We will be back online next Thursday as well, and Gail will be joining us then. In the meantime, stay tuned for more episodes that get launched on Mondays and Wednesdays. We launch every new episodes. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening.